It's just past noon in ancient Rome. The sun is hammering the stone. The street smells like wood smoke and warm bread, and your stomach is growling like a stray dog. You want lunch? Problem: there's no fridge in your apartment. There's no kitchen in your apartment either. And the woman at the counter next to you is pouring a brown, salty liquid made from fermented fish guts onto everything she eats. He's not the weird one, you are, for hesitating. Because that fish gut sauce is about to go on your food too. Welcome to lunch. So here's the question almost nobody actually asks. What did a normal Roman eat in a normal day? Not the emperor, not the insane banquet with roast flamingo and songbirds. A regular person on a regular Tuesday, and the answer is going to sound bizarre for about 3 minutes, and then you're going to realize you basically eat like a Roman already. You just didn't know who to blame. Spoiler, it's Rome. Let's start with the obvious because it's the first thing that breaks your brain. Romans did not eat 3 balanced meals a day. That whole idea, breakfast, lunch, dinner, on plates, with a fork, is basically modern. For most of Roman history, a regular person ate almost nothing until evening. 1 real meal a day. That was the plan. Here's roughly how the day actually ran. Morning meal. They called it yentaculum. Do not imagine pancakes, imagine a piece of bread. Maybe with a smear of cheese, a few olives, some leftover something from the night before, eaten standing up, fast, barely a meal. Basically the Roman equivalent of eating a cold slice over the sink at 7 a.m. and calling it food. Midday came prandium, lunch also small. Cold leftovers, bread, cheese, fruit, a bit of fish, no cooking, no sitting down for an hour. You grabbed it and moved on, because the whole point of the Roman day was building toward the one meal that mattered. That meal was Cena, dinner. And this is where a Roman finally sat down, well, lay down. If you had money, you didn't eat at a table in a chair. You reclined on a couch, propped on one elbow, in a room built specifically for this called a triclinium. 3 couches, you ate lying on your side, reaching for food with your right hand, for hours. And Cena had structure. First the gustatio, the starter. Eggs, olives, salads, shellfish, vegetables in that fish sauce we'll get to. Then the main event, the mensae primae, meat, fish, whatever the household could afford. Then mensae secundae, the sweet course, fruit, nuts, honeyed cakes. Because sugar didn't exist yet in Rome, if a Roman wanted something sweet, the answer was always honey, always. So already you can see the shape of it. Skip breakfast, graze at lunch, then one long, structured, social feast at the end of the day. If that sounds like a certain modern eating trend people pay coaches to teach them, yeah, blame it on Rome. Now, the fish sauce. We have to talk about the fish sauce, because you cannot understand Roman food without it. It was called garum and it was everywhere. On meat, on fish, on vegetables, in sweet dishes, mixed with wine, mixed with honey, mixed with vinegar. How was it made? You took fish, guts and all, packed it in salt, and left it in the sun to ferment for weeks or months until it broke down into a thick, funky, intensely savory liquid. Then you strained off the good stuff and bottled it. It smelled so aggressive that making it inside the city was sometimes banned, and Romans put it on almost everything. Here's the twist, it's not gross, it's genius. That fermented fish liquid is pure umami, the deep savory flavor bomb. It's the same instinct behind Worcestershire sauce, behind Southeast Asian fish sauce, behind the ketchup you squeeze on fries without thinking. Garum was Roman ketchup, one sauce on everything in every household. Hold on to that, the ketchup thing comes back. Now let's talk about the real foundation of the Roman diet. Not the flamingos, not the couches, bread. Grain was the base of nearly every meal, and Rome ran on it so completely that the government literally handed it out. It was called the grain dole, the unowner. At its peak, a couple 100,000 citizens in the city of Rome got free or heavily subsidized grain every single month from the state. Think about that. The most powerful empire in the ancient world had, effectively, a public food program keeping the capital fed, because a hungry city is a dangerous city. A poet named Juvenal rolled his eyes at this and gave us a phrase you still use 2,000 years later, panem et circenses. Bread and circuses. His complaint was that you could keep the people happy and quiet with just two things, free food and free entertainment. Every time someone today says bread and circuses about politics, blame it on Rome. But here's what most people miss, and it's the single most important fact about Roman food. Most Romans were not reclining on couches eating songbirds. Most Romans were poor. And the poor did not eat bread first, they ate porridge. The oldest Roman staple was pulse, a thick grain mush, usually made from emmer wheat, boiled up with water and salt, maybe with some beans, herbs, or a scrap of cheese thrown in if you were lucky. For centuries, this porridge was so central that Greeks literally mocked the Romans as the porridge people. The empire that conquered the Mediterranean started out running on gruel, and the everyday food beyond that porridge was humble and, honestly, kind of healthy: lentils, chickpeas, beans, cabbage, leeks, onions, garlic, olives, and olive oil. Cheese, eggs, whatever fruit was in season. Meat was a luxury for most people, a treat for festivals, not a nightly thing. If you were a regular Roman, you were mostly a vegetarian by budget, not by choice. So if you're a poor Roman with no kitchen, in a cramped apartment block, how do you actually eat a hot meal? You buy it from the street. Roman cities were packed with fast food counters called thermopolia, basically a stone bar with big clay pots sunk into the countertop, kept warm, serving hot food and drink to people passing by. Stews, sausages, chickpeas, warm spiced wine. You walked up, you paid, you ate standing at the counter or took it to go. In Pompeii, archaeologists have dug up around 80 of these things. Read that again: a dense city, full of people with no home kitchens, eating cheap hot food from counters on the street corner all day long. That's not a quirky detail, that is the direct ancestor of the fast food joint. 2,000 years before the drive-thru, Rome already had takeout culture. Blame it on Rome. Now, one detail that trips everyone up: watch a Roman eat and something's missing. There's no fork. Romans did not use forks to eat. That's not a Roman thing. The table fork doesn't really show up in Europe until well over 1,000 years later. So how did they eat? Fingers, mostly, especially for solid food, which is exactly why Cena was eaten reclining on your left side, keeping your right hand clean for food. They had spoons for eggs and soft stuff, and knives for cutting at the kitchen. But the fork, the thing you assume is ancient and universal? A Roman would look at it like you brought a tiny trident to dinner. And they drank wine. Everyone drank wine. Rich, poor, adults, watered down for the young. But here's the part people get wrong: Romans almost never drank it straight. Drinking undiluted wine was seen as crude and uncivilized, the mark of a heavy drinker or a foreigner. Proper Romans mixed their wine with water, sometimes 2 or 3 parts water to 1 part wine. And the poorest people and the soldiers on the march drank something called posca, basically sour wine or vinegar mixed with water. Cheap, a little acidic, safer than plain water, mildly energizing. It was the ancient world's version of a cheap sports drink, not glamorous. But it kept an empire's army on its feet across 3 continents. Now hold on, some of you are thinking about the other Rome, the Rome of over-the-top banquets, of eating well past full, of the famous room where rich Romans supposedly emptied their stomachs so they could keep feasting. Fair question, so let's put that myth to bed right now. The vomitorium was real, but it wasn't a room for that. A vomitorium was the passage in an amphitheater that poured the crowds out into the streets after the show. It's a stadium exit. The idea that Romans built dedicated stomach-emptying rooms into their houses is basically a modern misreading of a Latin word. Were there wild, over-the-top banquets among the super-rich? Absolutely. Dormice rolled in honey, whole roast peacock, dishes designed purely to show off wealth. But that was a tiny sliver of the population showing off, the ancient equivalent of a billionaire's gold leaf steak. It was never how Rome actually ate. And that's the uncomfortable part. If you sit with it, Roman food wasn't really about food. It was about class, stamped onto a plate 3 times a day. The rich reclined for hours and had garum-drenched exotica carried in entrees. The poor stood at a counter and ate porridge and beans. What you ate, where you ate, whether you sat or lay down, whether you even had a kitchen, all of it broadcast exactly where you stood in Roman society before you said a single word. Food was the loudest, most visible way to tell everyone who you were. Which honestly has not changed nearly as much as we'd like to think. But here's the warm part. Strip away the flamingos and the class games, and what's left on the average Roman table is sterling, olive oil, bread, wine, legumes, vegetables, fish, cheese, fruit, garlic, herbs. Light on meat, heavy on plants. Nutritionists have a modern name for that exact combination. They call it the Mediterranean diet, and they'll tell you it's one of the healthiest ways a human can eat. The regular Roman, the one with no kitchen, eating beans and bread and a splash of fish sauce, was quietly eating the diet doctors now beg us to go back to. They weren't deprived, they were, mostly by accident, kind of ahead of us. So back to you, standing in that street at noon, stomach growling, no fridge, no fork, fish sauce incoming. Now you know what the day actually looks like. Barely their breakfast, a quick cold lunch. Hot food grabbed from a counter on the street. One long social dinner, lying down, eaten with your hands, everything splashed with the ketchup of the ancient world. Bread underneath all of it, handed out free to keep the city calm. Skip breakfast, eat out, one big shared meal, plant-heavy plate, a savory sauce on everything, and a state that keeps you fed and entertained. Look at your own week. You didn't invent any of it. You inherited it, and you can absolutely blame it on Rome.